Welcome to this explainer lesson. You're here because you don't just want a casual overview, right? You are a serious learner and you are ready to really master the foundational structures of the ocean. So let's dive right in. Today, our mission is to completely map out how these vast, seemingly untamable oceans are actually governed. We're going to bypass the traditional classroom lecture and give you a precise, step-by-step breakdown of maritime governance. Let's start with a really foundational anchor. Maritime governance transforms the chaotic nature of the oceans into a structured, lawful domain, ensuring national security, human safety, environmental protection, and economic growth. That is what this topic is, and frankly, that's why it matters. Without these structures, the sea is basically just a lawless void, but with them, it becomes a manageable, safe space for civilization. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the blueprint, Buger's matrix. Second, we'll define the 4 pillars. Third, we'll see how those pillars interact. Fourth, we'll examine India's institutional response. And finally, we'll wrap up with a structured course recap. All right, part 1, the blueprint, or Buger's matrix. Before we can even talk about the rules of the sea, we really need to know how scholars and policymakers actually organize those rules. Now, what's really fascinating here is that there isn't just one single universally canonized formula for ocean governance that's set in stone. But we are going to use the framework that has the absolute widest academic currency. It's built on Christian Buger's Matrix of Maritime Security, which was published in the journal Marine Policy back in 2015. It is literally the most cited academic model for this exact kind of study, organizing ocean governance into 4 interconnected pillars. If you ever read other materials that use slightly different labels, just know that the substance maps directly back to Buger's definitive 2015 matrix. Moving right into part 2, defining the 4 pillars. We're going to learn each of these 4 core concepts in exact order. For every single one, I'll explain it in plain language first, and then we will lock in that precise legal definition. Precision really matters here. First up, we're looking at classical, state-level power struggles at sea. This is really all about nations protecting their borders and projecting their power. So the precise definition of Pillar 1, national security, is this: sovereignty and territorial integrity at sea. This includes control over maritime zones, think the territorial sea, the exclusive economic zone, and the continental shelf, as well as naval power projection, defense against external state threats, and the resolution of maritime boundary disputes. Historically, this has been the absolute highest priority for states. It's the foundation that classical law of the sea doctrine is built entirely around. Let's make sure this rule really sticks. National security is fundamentally about sovereignty, control over maritime zones, and defense against external state threats. Now let's shift our focus from the state level, right down to individual safety. While that first pillar was all about countries, this second pillar is about people. The formal definition of Pillar 2, human security, is protection of individuals from non-state threats at sea. This explicitly includes things like piracy, armed robbery, maritime terrorism, human trafficking, and migrant smuggling. For a concrete example, just think of piracy, which, despite what you see in the movies, is actually a highly complex legal issue that you'll dive deep into during Module ML203. But remember, the example doesn't replace the rule, so let's restate that formal definition one more time. Human security is the protection of individuals from non-state threats at sea. Next up, we really have to talk about the plain language need to protect ocean health. I mean, we simply cannot use the oceans if we destroy them, right? The exact parameters for Pillar 3, the marine environment, are defined as protection of the ocean from pollution, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, which is commonly known as IUU fishing, and biodiversity loss. A really great, concrete example of this is the protection of coastal biodiversity. In fact, threats to coastal biodiversity and habitat regulation sit right at the heart of this pillar, and they represent the main through line for your M104 studies. So let's anchor our formal rule here. The marine environment pillar is the protection of the ocean from pollution, IUU fishing, and biodiversity loss. Finally, we have to talk about the state's commercial interests at sea. The ocean is just this massive economic engine. So we cap off our definitions with Pillar 4, economic development. This is formally defined as the blue economy, meaning the state's interest in ensuring that shipping, fisheries, offshore energy, and seabed resources all happen safely, lawfully, and sustainably. Commercial shipping is your prime, concrete example for this one. Making sure cargo moves safely across the globe is pure economic development. And since this connects directly to your future modules on shipping laws and admiralty, let's lock in this final rule. Economic development is the blue economy, ensuring all commercial activities like shipping and resource extraction happen safely and lawfully. All right, part 3, how the pillars interact. Shifting to a slightly more dynamic perspective here, let's explore why these 4 pillars are actually a connected web, rather than just isolated silos. This is absolutely critical. The interaction between these pillars is the actual analytical point of Berger's framework. It's not just a footnote, it's the core lesson. Let's walk through some exact examples from the source material to see how this cross-pollination happens in the real world. First up, piracy. Piracy is a human security issue because it threatens individuals, right? But it also directly disrupts shipping lanes, which suddenly makes it a massive economic development issue. Second, IUU fishing, or illegal fishing. That damages the marine environment, but because it destroys local food sources, it immediately becomes a livelihood and human security issue too. Finally, when a state uses naval patrols to defend its borders, which is a national security action, those exact same patrols often end up enforcing environmental regulations against smugglers, which touches the marine environment pillar. You see, they are constantly interacting. That brings us to part 4, India's institutional response. Now let's take this academic blueprint and apply it to a live, real-world illustration. We're going to look at India to see how a state actually attempts to govern these 4 interacting pillars. In 2015, India introduced the Sagar Doctrine. Sagar stands for Security and Growth for All in the Region. And this is a perfect example of blending these governance pillars into actual, functional state policy for the Indian Ocean region. The doctrine explicitly fuses the security pillars and the economic growth pillars together into a single unified policy framework. But saying you're going to fuse the pillars and actually doing it institutionally, those are 2 very different things. Let's map this out to clearly demonstrate the severe institutional fragmentation that existed across India's governing agencies. Look at how disconnected this whole setup was. National security was handled by the Indian Navy. Human security fell to the Coast Guard. The marine environment was managed by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And economic development was handled by the Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways. That's 4 pillars managed by 4 completely separate, disconnected agencies. Basically, a bureaucratic nightmare. So, how do you actually solve that kind of bureaucratic fragmentation? More concretely, India created a very precise institutional solution. The post of the National Maritime Security Coordinator, or NMSC, was established in 2022. Its specific purpose was to serve as a single coordinating authority for those exact 4 disconnected agencies we just mapped out. Finally, part 5, our structured course recap. Let's just take a breath. We have covered a vast amount of academic and legal ground today. I want to patiently transition into our final, structured review of today's lesson so these concepts are firmly cemented in your mind. Let's walk chronologically right back through every key term, doctrine, and institutional response in our exact teaching order. First, we established our origin, Christian Bulger's 2015 Matrix of Maritime Security, which is the definitive academic blueprint. Second, we strictly defined the 4 pillars: national security, which is state sovereignty and defense; human security, protecting individuals from non-state threats; marine environment, protecting ocean health and biodiversity; and economic development, which is the blue economy and lawful resource use. Third, we learned that the analytical core of this framework is pillar interactions, meaning they operate as a connected web, not isolated silos. And fourth, we looked at India as a live illustration, noting how the 2015 Sagar Doctrine conceptually fused security and growth. This eventually required the creation of the National Maritime Security Coordinator in 2022 to fix the real-world institutional fragmentation. Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question, explicitly queuing up your next syllabus topic. We saw India's fragmentation and coordination problem, but how do these institutional arrangements actually work in practice across other different states and global bodies? When you're ready, simply move on to the next lesson on institutional arrangements, actors, and institutions to unpack exactly that. Thank you so much for learning with me today.